WNST here, which still is a little bit of a pinch me moment, I must add. This segment is not Caps-oriented. Luke Jones joins us here, and lo and behold, and I know people might find this far-fetched after 6 weeks of watching the Caps, and I've got my Skipjacks jersey here. My wife and I were rewatching the parade on Wednesday, but Luke, we have our own teams in Baltimore, don't we? We have a football team and a baseball team, and quite frankly, I feel disrespectful to you. By the way, I smell the suntan lotion on that from the monuments the other day. This has been a really busy week for you, who covers the Ravens and the Orioles, although I guess in the minds of the fans here, Orioles getting swept, no one's gotten hurt in Owings Mills. I've seen some friends of mine out there taking some pictures and whatnot, but this has been pretty breezy and quiet, aside from the fact that they drafted this kid 5 weeks ago and all hell sort of broke loose, right, for a little while. But this has been kind of quiet this week, right?
Yeah, and that's what you want. When it's not quiet, that's when either someone has suffered a season-ending injury, which, think about it, at this point last year, the Ravens had already lost Tavon Young, who had such a big rookie season. Clearly they were pinning him to be their nickel corner, and he's back now, and has had his ups and downs, as you would expect coming from an ACL, but they had already lost him for the season, and they had already lost Dennis Pitta to the third and ultimately career-ending hip injury for him. So, and you consider how big of a part of the offense he was the year before, after the kind of the second improbable comeback for him. Things were already rough, and we knew it would get even rougher. And look, the Ravens are going to suffer injuries. That's the nature of the beast. You hope it's not as many as they had last year, or that they had in 2015 when things completely went off the rails.
Yeah, it's been a real recent thing for them, the injury thing. That's been real for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think two years ago, I think it was a little overstated when you look at where they stacked up compared to everyone else. But I think the timing of some of these injuries, and I'll throw one individual out there who actually returned to the practice field this week, albeit on a very limited basis, Jimmy Smith. How many times have we talked about him going all the way back to, his rookie year? Remember, he got hurt on, I think, the first kickoff of the season and had a high ankle sprain and really was a non-factor the rest of that rookie season. But back from the Achilles, only did a little bit this week and actually spent most of his time kind of on the sideline. And former secondary coach Steve Spagnuolo was in Owings Mills, just visiting the team, catching up with some old friends. But good to see him out on the field doing a little bit of backpedal. I know Eric Weddle joked and said that we think Jimmy Smith is part Wolverine, saying that he has kind of a mutant recovery ability, which, I don't know, he's had a lot of injuries in his career, but at least with this one, for him to be back on the practice field just barely over 6 months after having the Achilles, that certainly bodes well for him participating in at least a meaningful portion of training camp, and more importantly, certainly bodes well for him to be ready for the start of the regular season. And
by the way, we've seen a lot of that, haven't we, around here in the last 5-6 years too? Whether it's Terrell Suggs, whether it's Ray Lewis, sort of, I don't want to say miraculous comebacks, but comebacks that come back all the way, right? And I know we'll talk about Yanda and where he'll be as well, but we have seen guys where, my father in his generation, your father's generation, we would have said, well, that guy hurt his knee, he'll never be the same, right, or whatever. That I don't use that expression. That's a get off my lawn expression. That guy will never be the same. He got hit. Flacco will never be the same. I don't know. Some guys respond differently to all this. No one would have thought Ovechkin was going to win a cup when he started to get rich and fat, right? But things change. But physically, the one thing you can say about Jimmy Smith is he's had a lot of injuries. He's always gotten back out on the field and flashed that thing that is Jimmy Smith, which is, he's a really good player when he's right?
Yeah, there's no question about it. And he's always been that guy that you felt was on the cusp of becoming that Pro Bowl player, a legitimate Pro Bowl player, meaning named to the Pro Bowl and kind of hitting that upper tier of, I don't know if elite, but shutdown corners, maybe some in the top 10, wherever he ranks. And we saw that happen in 2014. Remember, he had the Liz Frank injury, and certainly how he played in 16 before he had the ankle issue in New England. That really, you look at that and consider the trickle down impact that had on the secondary the rest of the year. the fateful Christmas Day game in Pittsburgh where the Ravens couldn't stop Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown.
But I did get good cookies that day. I'm going to keep bringing that up. Mr. Rooney brought me some nice cookies that day.
No question. The food in the Heinz Field
had a nice Christmas roast that day. It was, it was all good until it wasn't good.
But it really speaks to, even when they haven't had the volume of injuries that they had last year, and the volume was astronomical last year, especially early. Not just OTAs, like I mentioned, but the training camp injuries before they even get into the season, especially on an offense that didn't have a margin for error really to begin with. But in the case of Jimmy Smith, it's always been just when he's getting to that point where you're ready to put him in that top tier, he has an injury. Now, in the case of the Achilles, we'll see how he comes back. And to the point you just made, yes, modern medicine is unbelievable. Athletes and rehab regimes and workout regimes and regimens and what they're able to do now compared to an Achilles 20 years ago. Guys would come back, but they truly weren't the same. Now, we'll see. I think you do look at his injury history. You look at the fact that he's going to be 30 years old next year. And also, I think you just look on a more global scale when you look at this roster and the future of this football team. I think it's very clear Marlon Humphrey, to me, is a guy that if he stays healthy, in the same conversation you say for anyone else, he looks like he's going to be the top guy for this team at the cornerback position sooner rather than later, and it could even be this year, depending on what Jimmy Smith looks like. But and Wink Martindale talked a little bit about this when he had his media session this week in Owings Mills. This secondary is very deep, especially if they get Jimmy Smith back, and he's somewhere close to where he was the last 2 years, and I don't expect him to be unbelievable, at least early in the season. But if he can at least be good, you have Marlon Humphrey, who has a year of experience under his belt and is an ascending player. I already mentioned Tavon Young. Oh, yeah, you still have Brandon Carr on this roster, who, I get it, you don't want to leave him on an island with Antonio Brown, who you can say about 99% of corners in this league, and that didn't work out well, but he's a really solid number 2 corner.
Yeah, you need him running around out there 75 plays, right?
And that's the thing, too. In 10 years, he has never missed a game. He has never missed a start. So you have those 3 strictly for the outside, and then you talk about guys like Tavon Young, Maurice Kennedy. They drafted Anthony Averett from Alabama. Jalen Hill, who's going to be coming back from
Sounds
the
like
ACL.
A spirited competition, right? Literally.
Yeah, they're going to be in a position. They are going to be cutting or trading a very competent NFL corner. Just because you're not going to carry 8 corners. That's just the reality.
Man, I remember 5 straight off seasons. Ozzie must be reading WNST.net. That Luke Jones has said, we need help in the secondary. The secondary's weak. They're still thin in the secondary. They're an injury away in the secondary. Oh, my God, the kid they drafted in the secondary, he's gone. And, all of this has gone on, and this is finally going to be the 1 year you're going to open training camp. Dude, you owe it to Ozzie on the way out the door to at least write one blog praising the fact that they have too many guys in the second. You don't even want to use the word too many, I don't think.
Well,
right?
I had that one in the portfolio, and then my annual article about the wide receiver position. So, that one I'm still a little more skeptical.
A lot of clubs in your bag, Luke. It's only June, brother. Come on now.
Oh, and hey, and you can talk all you want about depth. 2 injuries at one position group, then we're talking a different story.
If Jimmy Smith's limping today, we're a different team, right?
Right. Right now, Jimmy Smith being back on the field, even if it's just backpedaling a little bit this week, but you have roughly just under 3 months to go until the season opener. The fact that he's on the field now, barring a significant setback, you would think he's going to be out there week 1. And when he tore his Achilles, when that Achilles that nagged him throughout the season last year, and he played at such a high level in spite of that, when that finally gave way against Detroit in early December, we were all saying, what? We knew he was gone for the season. That was the obvious. We were saying, what? Is this guy going to be ready for the start of next year? Because especially at the cornerback position, it's tough. All the change of direction, the back pedal, that's tough. When you have an Achilles, it's not just the surgical repair. You have so much atrophy in your calf, in the muscle, the muscles in your foot, all through your lower leg. That takes a while to rebuild that. And
no 2 injuries are alike in that case either, right?
Yeah.
And weight bearing and all the things we went through with Suggs, at least with him, he's like this otherworldly athlete, Jimmy Smith, right? Literally.
Yeah. I mean, there's no question. So it's good to see that. And again, he still has a ways to go. He still has a long way to go, and I think he'd be the first to tell you that. But to get back to your larger point as far as this week of mandatory minicamp, it's been quiet. It's been relatively calm. It's always, from what you see on the practice field, it's always positive. I mean, coaches are glowing about everyone. Teammates are glowing about everyone. You'll never hear someone say during OTAs, yeah, so-and-so's really stunk out there. You know, they might get mad at reporters reporting that they're dropping passes, but everyone's positive. So that part doesn't move me too much, but the fact that they are in such good shape to this point in the offseason, and they still have rookie school, and guys can still get hurt working out on their own. I mean, Kenneth Dixon was an example of that last year before camp even started, but they definitely, from a health standpoint, it feels like they're trending much more in the upward direction than downward like they were already at this time last year.
Luke Jones can be found Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Make sure you're downloading the app, and I have it on good terms that Justin Tucker it will also be appearing a few more times in this year's versions of Royal Farms commercials. Royal Farms coffee, the Kona blend, available and getting you ready for the World Cup that begins this weekend as well. Luke has been running back and forth from Ravens to Orioles, Orioles to Ravens, and, I guess for the Ravens side of this, quiet is good. Offensive line, Marshall Yanda, I saw the team threw out a bunch of their media stuff for Monday, and those media days, I remember those things were like kayfabe, right? Like nobody ever talked about the media days. Now they're like all out in front of all that stuff, but, offensive line and trying things out and tinkering around with things and trying to talk Lamar Jackson into catching the ball. I guess all that's in play on the other side of the ball, right?
Yeah, it is. And, when you're talking about the offensive line, I still have some concerns there. I think there's still very real questions. Yanda is on track to be ready at some point, probably early in training camp. I would expect you're not going to see him in the preseason other than maybe the dress rehearsal. Normally the third preseason game. It's the fourth one this year because the Ravens have the extra one. But they're going to bring him along slowly, and rightfully so. But they have to figure out what the center position is going to look like. And then there's going to be a trickle-down effect. What they do at center is going to impact what they do at left guard, and that could impact what they do at right tackle. We know Ronnie Stanley's going to be the left tackle. We know Marshall Yanda is going to be the right guard. There are an abundance of candidates, and I think I feel good about some of them, some more so than others, but there are question marks there. You and I, before minicamp started, we were talking a lot about Alex Lewis and the fact that the Ravens have given him some run at the center position. Well, he's been sidelined this week with back spasms. Not anything that's considered overly serious, but it goes back to our point. It's great to talk about him being a center. It's great to talk about him having potential to maybe be a Pro Bowl guard one day, and I know John Harbaugh's spoken in those terms in the past. This guy, as talented as he is, he's got to stay on the field, and that's something that is a concern. So, not so much with this specific back issue, but just in general. I mean, he's missed, 22 games in his NFL career now. So that's a lot for a third-year player. So you have that. I think there's questions about Matt Skura. Can he anchor? Is he strong enough up the middle to be a center? He kind of sort of held his own at guard last year, thrown into a difficult situation. And then, so you kind of have those two guys. James Hurst is going to fit into this equation in some way, whether it's as a guy that has a ton of versatility on game day, or whether it's him starting at left guard if they decide to have Alex Lewis at center, and then they go with Orlando Brown Jr. at right tackle, or if they say Skura is going to be the guy and Alex Lewis is at left guard, and then you see Hurst competing with the rookie third-round pick. So, you like having guys that can be versatile, but ultimately, cohesion, being a cohesive unit, gelling, having that continuity on the offensive line is of the utmost importance. And we saw, in addition to Joe Flacco not being healthy early in the season last year because of the back and everything that was disrupted during training camp, this offensive line really struggled. I think as the year went on, it got better, They certainly run blocked well, but it wasn't until later in the season where you felt like the pass protection was at least improving to a point where the passing game was more functional. And then we saw the offensive numbers did improve late in the season, despite not having very good options at wide receiver and tight end. So I still have concerns about the O-line. They still have time to figure this out. I think the good thing is you do have some versatile pieces that you can move around. But again, at some point, sooner rather than later in the preseason, you'd like to get that group, kind of get an idea of what your best five and your best combination of those five is, and then you can go with it a little bit. I don't care so much about results in preseason games by any means, but you do want to see those guys start stacking days and figuring out who's going to be your center. Because, I have no problem with the Ravens saying they weren't going to make Ryan Jensen the highest paid center in the NFL, but you still
what's
need
plan
to replace
B?
them. You still need to replace them, and we've said that about Kelechi Osemele. We said that about Rick Wagner a couple years ago. So you still need to replace them, and that part of the equation for the offense is still up in the air as far as how it's going to work out. There's some depth, but I don't think you look at that group and say you feel as good about them as you do all the options that they have in the secondary right now, assuming everyone's healthy.
Luke Jones is our guy. He'll be out at Ravens to complete the week. And, dude, we're getting to the end of the end, right? Like, everyone goes nappy nap this weekend, and they go away, and hopefully they don't show up with any injuries or any blotters, and Joe Flacco doesn't develop a backache like he did this time last year, and all those things. But there is optimism out there, and I would even go back to Flacco and Lamar Jackson for all of the conjecture and all the hand-wringing and all the conversations we had with all the national people. You are pretty much about to jump up on the table and say, there's no way Joe Flacco's not running this football team.
I find, and I shouldn't be surprised because, look, so many of these sites that are basically aggregate sites, they pick up news from all 32 teams and they'll blog about it. And look, everyone's trying to get clicks. Everyone's trying to, they have ads they want to sell and all that. We understand that. That's you're in the business of selling things, and but there's a product that you have to produce with that. So I understand that, but I feel like every compliment that's been thrown out there about Lamar Jackson, and look, there's been plenty of them. The coaches and the players are impressed with his skills. But that said, I feel like some of it's been cherry-picked to kind of push the agenda that there's this quarterback controversy right now. And I just don't see that. I think anyone who's been out there watching, albeit a limited number of practices to this point, it's very clear Joe Flacco is the best quarterback they have by a wide margin right now. Better than RG3, better than Josh Woodrum, and better than Lamar Jackson. Now, that's not me hating on Lamar Jackson. He's a rookie quarterback. He was taken 32nd for a reason. There's a reason why he wasn't the first overall pick, and that's because he needs to develop. And by the way, the first overall pick and these quarterbacks that were taken in the top 10 and top 15, and this is the case on an annual basis, very few of them come in from day one and play at a high level. So I don't mean this to say that Lamar Jackson is disappointing or anything like that. He's not. He's a rookie. He wows you with his feet. He wows you with his athleticism. He has a very strong throwing arm. I think he's working hard. By all accounts, even talking to some members of the PR staff, this is a great kid. He wants to do well. He works hard, but he's not a finished product. So I just caution everyone that is so weary, so fatigued by what's been a lousy Ravens offense for years now, and Flacco has to wear part of that. You know how I've felt about that. I think he's been asked to wear too much of that, quite frankly, almost to a point where he's been a scapegoat in some instances. But he needs to play better. But that said, everything we're seeing this spring does not lend itself to saying, well, Lamar Jackson might be pushing Joe Flacco week one. Now, if this Ravens team has some injuries, doesn't play well, Flacco looks like he did the last couple years, and they're 4-7 and going nowhere fast, then we'll talk entering the month of December.
But part of that would be Flacco's fault, and that's because he's the $25 million quarterback, right?
That would be the assumption that he, even with all these new pieces and a new quarterbacks coach and all these and presumed health, or whether he's healthy or not, if he's not performing, then we'll talk. But I keep seeing certain pundits, not here in Baltimore, because I think anyone who's been out there locally can see very clearly what Joe's the best quarterback they have right now, and it's not really close. That said, they do love Lamar Jackson's athleticism, and I think there is a way, although there's certainly risk involved, and I wrote about that this week at WNST.net, because you want to accomplish two things here. You need to have rhythm with your, quote, traditional offense, and you also don't want to hinder the long-term development of Lamar Jackson, because when you're asking him to line up, whether it's as a running back, a wide receiver, an option kind of a quarterback deal, and you motion Flacco because you really want to get crazy, you ask him to do those things, you're asking him to focus exclusively on his athleticism in those cases. But one thing that you want in any mobile quarterback is to develop that that judgment to know when to utilize your athleticism and when to not do it. Why? Because you want to keep yourself on the field and healthy. So I think there's a risk that if you do too much of trying to get a little too cute with some of these gadget plays and some of these different packages, it can hinder your overall offense. It's great to say you try all these different things and you run all these different plays, but if you don't master any of it, you're going to bog down and you're not going to have any rhythm. And on the flip side, to be an advocate for Lamar Jackson, you want him to develop, because I've said all along, and I'll stand by this. This isn't just someone that you drafted solely to push Joe Flacco or to just be a flyer. If you drafted him in the first round, you better have some conviction that you really think he can be your quarterback of the future. And maybe that is 3 years from now. Maybe it isn't next year, or maybe it isn't later this year, as some people might hope it to be. But you still want him to develop, and you've got to be careful here. So I think there's a balance. That said, when you have a kid who has such unbelievable athletic gifts, the fastest player on the field, quite likely in many cases, why wouldn't you try to get him the ball a handful of times a game? And if that can be another playmaker for you, if that can be an X factor for you, that's a little unconventional, but it's not going to bog down the rest of your offense, why wouldn't you try that? So it's going to be interesting, and certainly a lot of this is going to be trusting Marty Morningwig, which the results have been what they've been the last couple of years. I don't think the track record here in Baltimore for him has been all that great, but it's putting some trust in him and also Greg Roman, who, of course, worked with Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco, worked with Tyrod Taylor early on when he was in Buffalo. So I think there's a potential here to utilize Lamar Jackson as a rookie, but again, don't misconstrue some of these compliments out there as being a quarterback controversy, because I don't see any semblance of a quarterback controversy right now. Again, check back with me in November or December if this team is flailing away and not making the playoffs.
Nothing's going to change in 6 weeks. I mean, they're going to come back into camp, and you're going to feel the same way about that the week before we go to Canton. And, boy, camp comes earlier, right? I mean, I keep looking at the math and saying, we'll see you in August. No, we won't. We'll see you toward the middle of July. This is going to be a longer camp, and I know Harbaugh had his days taken away last week, and he wasn't happy about that, and we'll go through that, and I'm sure he'll be going through that as well as the fines, but they're going to be at this a little earlier than later. So the wait isn't as long as it usually is, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because the baseball All-Star game is a little bit later. It's about a week later than it typically is
17th,
in July.
Right?
Training camp will be starting for the Ravens, of course, a week early because of the Hall of Fame game, the same week as the All-Star break. And in fact, I know that the Ravens, and we haven't mentioned this, but they're opening up 15 of their training camp practices in Owings Mills, which is a great thing for fans, certainly. But I know the first open practice for fans will be July 19th. That leads me to believe that they'll probably be on the field at least 1, maybe 2 days before that. They typically kind of ramp up slowly. They have that little acclimation period where they don't do any hitting. So you're talking mid-July. So that is both a blessing, but that can also be a curse. And I think that's where John Harbaugh, you hope, as an 11th-year head coach who this isn't his first rodeo, strikes that right balance between not just taking care of your veterans, but you need to take care of your rookies too. Let's not treat these rookies and young players like they're invincible. You have a longer camp, so you have an advantage there from a preparation standpoint, but you hope you utilize that time wisely in giving your guys some physical breaks, even giving them a mental break if necessary. So they have the Hall of Fame game. Keep in mind, they also practice against the LA Rams, and they're going to go out to Indy and practice against the Colts for a couple days. So there are a lot of opportunities here, and you love that when you have so many new pieces, especially on the offensive side of the ball, and even the defense. You have a new defensive coordinator, so you can absolutely view that as a major positive, but you got to take care of everyone, and that's where there's going to be a little, I don't know if scrutiny is the right word, but there's definitely going to be some attention paid to, and John Harbaugh will be the first to tell you that, how they're going to take care of these guys and keep them fresh, because you don't want to run, you don't want this to be the Junction Boys, and then they get to week one and then they're beat up and already feeling like they're looking toward the bye week.
All right, well, we'll rest off, hydrate, towel off. I've been a mess with the whole hockey thing. You've been on the football thing. Luke will be on the baseball thing all weekend as the Miami Marlins are in town this weekend as well. You can find him, Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. Big shout-out to our friends at Pizza John's. I got some pizza in. I ordered in because my son brought me pizza last weekend when we got back after the Stanley Cup. Always delicious. I had tried the ravioli. You know about Pizza John's. Been there 50 years down in Essex. Back River Neck Road, also served now at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. So we're giving that shout out as well. So you look for your Pizza John's when you're over at the ballpark. And I know that Luke appreciates that as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel, and always in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. That's there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. Download, listen when you want, where you want, how you want, podcasted on your mobile device. It's the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed. Planet of Triumphs has some awesome, sort of inspirational, get you through the summer type of stuff. Check that out as well. The Maryland Jockey Club also sponsoring our morning newspaper with the entries for Laurel this weekend. Every single day they're there. Every single day they're on the front of WNST.net. And yes, they are racing at Laurel this weekend. Get down, check out the sports bar, the club, all of the amenities. There's no T in there. Amenities that they have to offer. There you have it. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.